Welcome to Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah with a little touch of music. Tonight we have Rabbi Barry Silver and Andy Susman, and we're going to be speaking about the last sedra in Leviticus, and that's Bechukotai. And I turn it over to you, gentlemen. Rabbi and Andy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I appreciate all you do to help make these discussions possible and to also allow them to be disseminated throughout cyberspace to many people, some of whom are far away, or some who might be nearby but have difficulty getting out, and some who are still a little shy about COVID. Normally, we have a jovial conversation. Everything is rather lighthearted, but some of us have rather heavy hearts today. Some of us are a little perturbed about what's going on in this country and where we're heading. And so I would like to address that and also tie it in with the Torah reading. So I believe Cantorial Spiritual wants to do some music. I'm going to ask him to lead with one song and then make any comments you'd like. And then I'd like to address the Torah passage and the horrific violence that is plaguing our nation.
Well, I'm gonna ask for more than one, but real quick, we have 14 people at the present time, which means we have more than a minimum minyan, and we were grateful for that, which leads me to want to sing Shechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We give thanks to celebrate this moment. Amen. And as an opening tradition for this format of Touch of Torah, I'd like to sing a brief medley of some Torah songs that are near and dear to all of us. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Morasha Kihilat Yaakov, Morasha Kihilat Yaakov, Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Yisrael, Yisrael, be'oraita chadu. Torah, ora, Torah, ora, Hallelujah. Torah, ora, Torah, ora, Hallelujah. It is a tree of life to those who hold fast to it, and all of its supporters are happy. It is a tree of life to those who hold fast to it, and all of its supporters are happy. Shalom, 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 shalom. And I turn it back over to Rabbi.
Thank you so much. The Torah reading, the Shabbat, is Bechukotai. It deals with chukot, which are rules, statutes, regulations. The thrust of this passage is that if you do certain things, good things will result from it. If you do other things, you'll invite disaster. It's the law of cause and effect. This was written in a time before anyone knew about real cause and effect, like scientific principles and the way the universe operates. And so what they envisioned or imagined was if they obeyed God's laws, everything would be good. And if they disobeyed his laws, everything would be horrible. And so God says, follow my commandments, be obedient to the law, and the crops will give forth their yield. Your women will bear many children. You will defeat your enemies. The rains will come at the appointed time, and you will rejoice and be happy and live without fear. If you do the wrong thing and you disobey me, then your enemies will overrun you. You will plant crops that will be eaten by your enemies. Your women will be barren. You'll be driven from the land. You will be exiled, and you will suffer horrifically. What we've seen through history is that it's not quite that simple. Obedience to laws doesn't necessarily guarantee results. This was proven most tragically as described by Elie Wiesel, when the rabbis, looking back at a passage such as Bechukotai and others, told the people of Europe when the Nazis threatened, don't run, don't fight back, don't hide, pray, just pray to God, and you will be delivered. And while they were praying in the temple was burned down. And those who didn't pay any attention to such nonsense, some of them fought back, some of them fled, some of them saved themselves. And Elie Wiesel pays particular attention to this and says that after that point in Jewish history, many people no longer believed in God, or their concept of God changed. At Va-Dor, our concept of God has changed, at least as far as our philosophy and approach. Each person at Va-Dor is free to observe or believe or understand God in any way they want. But the direction and the philosophy of Va-Dor is a rational one. So what we do is we believe, as in Bechukotai, there are laws, there are cause and effect. If you do certain things, you will get certain results. If you do other things, you'll get other results. But this is based on reason. So for instance, after this despicable but all too predictable shooting, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, described the shooting as incomprehensible. Well, I suppose if you've never really addressed the problem and never tried to figure it out, and if you have a contempt for life, even while you call yourself pro-life, and you should call yourself pro-lie, because you have contempt for life, if you thought about it, it would not be incomprehensible at all. It'd be the most easy thing to understand. Bechukotai, cause and effect. If you allow the deranged to have easy access to weapons of mass destruction, murder, and mayhem, is not incomprehensible at all. It's the easiest thing to understand. You can expect a mass shooting every day, which is what we have in this country. And if the politicians only offer thoughts and prayers, then we haven't got a prayer. And if the people who are supposed to be taking care of us and protecting us say, gee, this is incomprehensible, I don't know why this is happening, when anybody with an ounce of common sense could tell you why it's happening, then you can just expect this to continue. I will also throw in something that I tried to effectuate when I was in the legislature, and many liberals opposed, and that is restrictions on so-called games, violent video games. They're not games. They're training films for mass murder that desensitize our youth and reward them with more points, the more callous they can be. And so I will throw this in, that if you raise an entire generation on these games which are ubiquitous, and you teach them through these so-called games that killing is thrilling, that a gun is fun, and that to maim is a game, and then you tie that in with the vicissitudes of teenage life and the angst and the depression, and you allow easy access to weapons of mass murder, then this is not incomprehensible at all. The only thing that is incomprehensible is how people can continue to elect these idiots And these people who are doing absolutely nothing to protect us, the right to life in the United States has been usurped and trumped by the whim of mass murderers who will decide for us whether we live or die and where the next victim will come from. And now I turn it over to Cantor Susman and everyone else to share your point of view and your comments or any questions.
Well, real briefly, Rabbi, you mentioned this the video games. I am not a devotee of video games whatsoever. As a matter of fact, my whole memory of games is infantile. I remember the initial game, Pong. I have a vague remembrance of what's it called, Pac-Man, and maybe Mario Brothers, whatever. That's it. I never followed video games, but I will tell you, I've seen the kids. I remember a game maybe 10, 15 years ago came out called Grand Theft Auto. If any of you have seen that, it is wildly depraved. And basically, it's thugs roaming the city, beating people up and shooting I mean, and third, fourth, fifth graders are playing this stuff. And of course, we all know about Call of Duty, all these military games. So yeah, so everything Rabbi said is spot on, and he had certainly a very eloquent use of alliteration with the different terms. So you're right. We have a very poor leadership, deranged leadership, and one of my concerns is that here this outcry about worrying about the unborn and bear not even a whisper about those that are in this world. I mean, just last Saturday, we could go Saturday, what happened in Buffalo, for God's sakes. So it's horrible. So I have a song just to kind of give it a little bit of a levity, or not levity, but a little more of a more melodic tinge to it. Let me screen share, and I got to find where it is. Yep, right here, and here it is. Okay, there is a song that is pretty legendary in Jewish folk circles. It's called Kol Ha'olam Kulo, or Gesher Tsar Ma'od, a very narrow bridge. And I'm going to give you one melody. There's several melodies to share, but this will be one that you may be familiar with, and then I'll do another one a little later on. And it goes like this. The world and you know what? There's some lyrics right below here, which I'll show you those. Good. So it's a little small. Make it bigger still. Hang on. Okay. So let me fix that. You'll see in the bottom right corner, this entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. But the main thing we can do is to face our fears and walk on through. But the main thing we can do is to face our fears and walk on through. Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar me'od, gesher tsar me'od, gesher tsar me'od, והעיקר, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. This entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge.
Andy, if you, thank you for that beautiful song. If you could go back to
let me stop screen share for a minute.
Now I want you to keep it on and go to the Hebrew words, move it down a little bit. Okay. I just want to go over what that means for everyone in case they'd like to understand the Hebrew. Kol means all, ha'olam is the world, and kulo means all of it. Srogad is the first word, kol. Gesher is a bridge, and tsar means narrow. It's related to the word Mitzrayim, which means a strait, the two straits. And it reminds us that when we were in Egypt, we were confined. And sometimes we are confined by our own thoughts and limitations, and we need to expand and become liberated. Tzal Me'od means very, very narrow. V'ha'ikar means the main thing is lo lifached, not to be afraid, kalal, at all. And I think we can use that perhaps to recognize that there are some people who have very narrow-minded thinking. To get out of this problem and many others, we need to expand our mind and to think big and to go back to what was in the Torah a long time ago. The Torah has the answer. These right-wing Christians, some Orthodox, the answer is right in front of them, but they don't look at the Bible and the important parts. The important parts is they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. We need to convert all these weapons of mass destruction into things that can be used to build a better society. And there's just some very, very narrow thinking that's preventing this from happening. And so I appreciate your sharing that. I'll also throw in this, that the gun is the original sin of the United States, used to wipe out the buffalo, commit genocide against Native Americans, and it was used as a substitute for justice on the frontier. We need to recognize that this is an original sin, and then we can atone, and then we can get past it. But as long as there are people who are celebrating the gun, not recognizing its sinful nature, and also worshiping it like an idol as our best means of protection, when it's really our means of self-destruction, until we transform our way of thinking, we're going to keep facing this over and over again. And the religious community should be out in front in leading the charge to transform our way of thinking. They should not be supporting the status cult of death that permeates the so-called pro-lie movement, I will call it, not pro-life. Anybody else want to share a thought? Go ahead, Andy.
Real quick, before I know Peter had his hand up. Ron Ames is here tonight, and we could certainly circle back, but about a month or two ago, Ron had brought to my attention, and some other gentlemen that I'm involved with, this article, this editorial about guns and gun ownership being more harmful than helpful in protecting a homeowner. As a matter of fact, a doctor had studied this, and he works in like maybe the emergency room of a hospital. And in 20 years of his practice, I don't think he had anybody that was injured defending his own home. It was a self-inflicted injury or an egregious, confrontation. It wasn't somebody robbing their house and they protected their property. So that myth that the guns are going to protect you is just that. It's a myth. Well, so maybe Ron wants to.
A gun can be used for self-defense and protection. It does happen, but the statistics are, Andy, that you're correct. It's more likely if you have a gun that you'll be the victim of gun violence than that you'll be saved from it. Anybody else? Let's open it up.
Peter had his hand up.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, hi. I had to unmute myself. I have a point to make that I know, Barry, I know that I just simply know that you're going to take my point and elaborate on it and make it better than it actually is. So let me start my point. Throughout the history of man, there's been insanity. And when you look back at the history of man, no matter who it's been, who has been insane, like Genghis Khan, Mussolini, Hitler, Osama bin Laden, insanity has been around for a very long time. And whether the individual is infamous with a big name like Osama bin Laden or whomever, or someone like this, I don't know what you want to call him, this teenager from high school who did what he did. Insanity has been around. And that's what I think about every blue moon, not on a daily basis, not even on a monthly basis, but what about the future? You know, I said to myself, I think within the last 2 to 3 months, and again, I don't think about this often, but something has to trigger it in me to think about it. I could read an article, I could see it on YouTube, whatever it might be. It always brings me back to insanity has been around. And here is another perfect example. No matter what his religion was, no matter, to really support your point about these government officials or political heads or whoever elects these people, they're missing something. They're missing the fact that you can't wipe out insanity, and they're just not looking at, you know how people say, well, medicine only handles the symptoms. What's the root cause? Well, the root cause is insanity, but nobody looks at that. And that's my point, Barry, that insanity has been around throughout the history of man, and it's going to exist in the future.
Let me comment on that. I think you did express it quite eloquently, but I will refer to one of my favorite theologians and thinkers and scientists, Albert Einstein. And he said this: the unleashing of atomic power has changed everything except for our mode of thinking. And thus we drift towards unparalleled destruction. And he's making the point that you make, Peter. Insanity, aggression, chauvinism, nationalism, these things have always existed. But today, we've increased our level of sophistication in our ability to inflict violence upon one another, but our way of thinking, our way of coping, our ability to get along, our maturity as a species has not changed at all. And thus, we now have weapons of war that can do what we could never do before. And the weapons are increasing in their violence, not just on a personal level, but an international level. And therefore, again, the religious community needs to step up and do something about it. Right now, they're doing nothing, or they're helping the other side. So I think what you said is extremely cogent. People say, well, it's a matter of mental health, and so it is. But we don't have more mental health issues in America than in other countries, but we have many, 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 many times more killing because of the access to weapons and other factors. Anybody else? Ron, go ahead.
Thank you. Unfortunately, there's an absolute fortune that is earned in the weapons field. That amount of money that they're able to take in is so overwhelming that it's difficult, if not impossible, to even make small changes. And by a small change, I would refer to something like instituting the legislation that's been discussed so long about testing the mental qualifications of someone to have a gun in their hand, and that somebody cannot purchase a gun unless they pass voluminous tests. They've discussed it over and over and over. It's never come through because the weapons industry is too powerful and everyone else doesn't fight the weapons industry adequately. I don't think anyone can disagree that the religious portion of our humanity should be fighting in the direction that we're talking about right now. But they have to be far better organized And they have to solicit lots and lots of money in order to counter the money that's there, that's fighting only for its own money, not for anything ethical, not for anything moral. And finally, I'd like to say that there are countries, and we know there are countries that do not allow people to have guns. There are particular reasons that they allow limited numbers of people to have it, but generally they don't. And the mortality rate in those countries is far lower.
Ron, thank you for bringing up two major issues. One is that the problem can be addressed by reducing gun ownership if the government decides to do it. And number two, I'll just say this. The NRA should now stand for not respectable anymore, and we should agree not to vote for anyone who takes their money. Number two, there should be background checks, not just on the owners of guns, but on the politicians to see what their background is like and how much money they're getting from these merchants of death. And three, there should be strict liability for guns. And here's what I mean. Right now, there's strict liability for cars and trampolines. And let me explain why. In the law, if you sue somebody, to prevail, you have to show the other person was negligent. They did something wrong. Except there's exceptions. Certain things are inherently dangerous. So like a trampoline, if I have a trampoline in my backyard and I take precautions not to let people on it, but some guy goes and gets hurt, I can be sued, strictly liable. I didn't do anything wrong. If I own a car and I let somebody else use the car and then they get into an accident, I didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Maybe the guy's a good driver. I'm responsible. Strict liability, regardless of negligence. There should be strict liability on a gun because the people who are selling guns are making a lot of money from it. And if their gun causes problems, these gun owners, these gun manufacturers should pay for the damages of the violence. And they should be able to be sued, strict liability, find out where that gun was manufactured and who owned it, who is it registered to, and go after them, make them pay. And then you'll see some changes. Next, I think we had Wendy. Oh, Ron, did you want to follow up?
I wanted to add one more thing. You know, one of the powerful weapons, which is a strange choice of words by me when we're talking about weapons, of maintaining a continuity of allowing the sale of a huge amount of weapons, is that there's a clause in the Constitution that allows it. And when that clause was put in, there was a good reason for it. We needed militias to protect us from foreign governments like England. That's not needed anymore. We have a clause now in the Constitution that's still there that serves no purpose other than to enhance the pocketbooks of the manufacturers of weapons.
That's a good point. I want to address it from a legal standpoint, but I want to get to Wendy and then I'm going to take a look at that. Go ahead, Wendy.
Ron brought up some very good points when he's saying about the fact that people should be evaluated whether or not they should have a gun. The problem is when you evaluate somebody, it's not something quick. You know, I don't think you can give them this 10-question questionnaire and it'll give you all the answers. I know this doesn't solve the problem, but I've wondered about for years why there aren't armed guards at every, school. I realize if it's at the entrances doesn't mean a crazy person can't figure out how to get in another way. But if it was accepted that there were security people in all these places, then I think over time, whether it's 6 months, a year, 3 years, these crazy people would realize that they can't get into those places, or to get into a school or a mall or a supermarket. Any of these heavily populated places. Plus, if you have a guard at the door, whatever, of these places, some people with some of these shootings said, some of the people by the top supermarket said that they had noticed for a few days a guy outside who just didn't look like he belonged, that kind of thing. If there was a guard at these entrances, when people aren't walking in and out, you know, his job would be to be looking around. Is there anybody that looks suspicious? And wouldn't some things get caught then? Wouldn't it deter some people? I'm not saying it would happen right away, but I would hope within the next year or so, it would, you know, deter some people, because right now the nuts know they can go in anywhere and it's a free for all.
Let me just share something. My wife is a teacher. My son is in the public school of Palm Beach County. My other one goes to college. There are guards. There are people with guns. At Parkland, there was a guy with a gun, and he was afraid to confront this guy. These people have weapons of mass murder. You come up with a gun and try to shoot the guy, you're done. A lot of these people have confronted others with weapons, and they just subdue them. That is not, I agree with you, Wendy, that it could put a Band-Aid on this situation and maybe make it incrementally safer. That's not the real solution. The real solution is not to allow people to have these types of weapons. And also, as far as your comment that the background check takes a while, good. Let it take a while.
Right.
Let it take a long time. Let them have to satisfy a whole bunch of procedural safeguards before they get it. I'm happy with that. You can't just get a driver's license. You don't get a driver's license in a day. Getting a license to own a gun, let it take a year. I don't care. Who else? Wendy, do you want to follow up?
Well, I just, you know, then I'm guessing, you know, that Ron is correct, that for those kind of things to get in place, that the gun lobby would be fighting against it.
Yeah, well, if there was a will of the government to do something, they would do it instantly. But they're more interested in currying favor with the lobbyists. We have a government of the lobbyists, by the special interest, and for the powerful. And nothing makes it more clear than this issue. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so a few things to mention to address Wendy's comment and Peter's earlier. So Wendy, if you remember, I don't know, was it a year ago or 6 months ago in Michigan, Oxford, Michigan, the parents were in the guidance counselor's office, and an hour later it all went south. All they had to do was grab that kid and take him home, get him out of the school, get that bag, confront. They didn't do it. And that's right there in near time, real time. That's one issue. Another issue is go back to Parkland. I personally lost 2 bar mitzvah students in Parkland. I sang or tried to sing at 2 of their funerals. I sang El Ma'aleh, very difficult at those funerals. And all sorts of signs were not responded to over a whole plethora of years and incidents. And what happens? What happens is they go after the figureheads who are not necessarily responsible for the specifics of what happened. They went after Runcie, they went after Scott Israel, but they didn't go down deeper of the people who were really the decision makers. And one of the most wild things of that scenario was they had a video camera. The feed from the video was on not a 2-minute, but a 20-minute delay. What is the purpose of live video if you're not going to see it live? So the whole system was fakakht. And I'll say one more thing, circling back to Peter's comment. we can mention all the quote unquote bad guys we want, but when you're pointing the finger, there are three fingers pointing back. So I'll give you a case in point. Who remembers, I say that somewhat sarcastically, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? More mayhem was caused by our governments going in there and dismantling some degree of balance in the Middle East after 9/11. And so many times it's not just the so-called bad guys that are the problem, it's the so-called good guys that are sowing seeds of resentment. And so it's all of us. And there's one last quote which Rabbi is most familiar with by, I believe it's Abraham Joshua Heschel. Some of us are guilty, but all of us are responsible.
Yeah, that's a good quote. It's actually in a democracy, some are guilty and all are responsible. That's good quote. I do want to mention something about, oh, go ahead, Ron.
I think everyone who is paying attention tonight is convinced before the first word on the subject came out. That's not the issue of convincing us why it's important to resolve it. What's important is to figure out how to get the power to resolve it. The power now is not in the hands of the legislators. It's in the hands of those people who put too much money into the pockets of the legislators. And so much so that the legislators can't afford not to listen to them. And so this is who the force has to go after. And if somebody can put together a group that keeps growing and is focused on going after that power, at least there would be a shot. It would not be easy to solve, but right now, the way it's being done, it's impossible to solve.
Let me share with you an observation that you've probably never heard before, and maybe somewhat controversial, but it's accurate as far as my experience goes. After the Parkland shooting, the media went wild and went to all the kids and their parents and made pretty much rock stars out of all of them. And whatever they said, no matter how inexperienced or injudicious, whatever they said, it was hailed as the most amazing things they ever heard. And so you had a movement that started. And what was their slogan? It was never again. And even Jewish groups said, rah, 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 you guys are awesome. A few of us, not many, a few of us said, use a different slogan. That's associated with the Holocaust. It's a Holocaust slogan that's associated with it. If you use that, the slogan will be diluted. Use a different slogan. They had other ones, don't be silent, speak up, things like that. They were infatuated with their own media exposure. They couldn't care less. They also said anyone who's over 21 is part of the problem. We don't need anybody. We don't need anybody who's over 21 to work with, because I contacted them. I've been working on this issue with Ari for 30 years. There's another guy, Tom Gabor. He wrote the book on gun control. He's voluminous in his knowledge, and he has lots of experience. Not interested in working with him. And they did not build bridges in a coalition that could have possibly made a difference. They did on their own, and then never again obviously became ever again with the next shooting. The motto didn't work. And What needs to happen is that everybody needs to work together. And you're correct in that there's money and power that you're going up against. And the way to overcome that is with the grassroots. Remember the Vietnam War. There's a lot of money in the defense industry and power maintaining that war. People on the ground started demonstrating and protesting, and then politicians realized, you know what? If I vote for this, I'm done. And Johnson decided, I'm not running again. Who does that? What president says not running for re-election? He did, because he could see that all the power and all the money didn't matter, because the people were rising up saying no. The women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, they challenged the establishment and the status quo by speaking up. Grassroots. That's the only way that's going to do this. The politicians, it's not going to come from the top. It never does. It's going to come from a whole bunch of people saying, you know what? We are so mad and so outraged and so fed up that we're all going to gather, we're going to protest, we're going to demonstrate. And anyone who takes money from the NRA, anyone who dares to support these pro-death people, a death cult, we're taking them out of office. We're going to vote them out. That has yet to happen. The people have not been outraged enough, and the movement has not been galvanized. But what we need, I don't know about you, I'm on everybody's email list. I get stuff from, there's about 5 different groups trying to have gun control. And there's 5 different ones that were spawned mostly out of Parkland. They contact me and they send me something, another shooting, send me money. Look at this, send me money. Look what happened here, send me money. And you know what? I send the same thing back every time. Here's a song I wrote. Use this. Would you like me to speak? Would you want to have our synagogue participate in a joint demonstration? I don't hear anything, nothing, 0. All I hear is, send me money. Well, my friends, if we want to change the paradigm, as Andy said, perhaps the best thing he said, and best thing anybody said tonight, in a democracy, some are guilty, all are responsible. And we can make it happen if we demand change. And I can tell you, as the rabbi of Congregation Va-Dor, and is speaking to our board on this and other issues, which believes in taking a stand, I and our congregation will mobilize and do everything we can to get a grassroots movement with other religious groups and the non-religious to change this paradigm, because this is not acceptable. We cannot be silent. And we will gather together with all the pro anti-gun groups. If they want to stop just raising money and join with us, we'll join with everybody and do something about it. And I do thank everyone here for participating in the discussion, sharing some of your thoughts, and making some excellent points. Between everybody here, there's a lot of collective wisdom. I would like to hear from Harris. Go right ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
2 things. You forgot to bring up the National Rifle Association.
No, I said them. NRA. I said them.
Well, which is a very popular group, which I get letters for money all the time, and they're not going to go away. But the most interesting thing that happened that I read today was Kissinger felt that the Ukrainians should give up the war. Did you hear that? Henry Kissinger said the only way the Ukrainians have to surrender. So that was in the Jewish newspaper today.
I could be wrong, but I think Kissinger's no longer with us. Or is he still around?
No, he's around.
Yeah, then he's not with us mentally. he's not all there, but the guy, he's not thinking clearly to say something like that. But
He's got to be in his late 90s.
yeah. Anyway, I did mention the NRA, and what I said about them is we should say that their initials now stand for not respectable anymore, NRA. And anyone who takes money from them we're voting them out of office. That should be our policy. Single issue, take them out. Go ahead, Andy. And then Sharon.
I want to sing a reprise of that song, a little different version.
Let's
But
have
before I do
Sharon.
Sharon
How
has something to say.
about this? The
Sharon,
only
thing I want to say is that Kissinger is 99 years old. So just saying.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily that if you're 99, you don't know what's going on.
Right.
But in his case, I don't think it was very coherent. I think it's been an excellent discussion. And more than that, I think we have a blueprint to take action. Our congregation will be taking action. Can I just
say one thing? As she looked up Kissinger, what he did say is that Ukraine must be willing to make concessions to end the conflict with Russia and avoid a new war against Russia itself.
Yeah, well, actually, that's not a whole lot different than even Zelensky is talking about possibly entering negotiations. So that's not quite so bad. So we shouldn't be too quick to judge. Like I said, it's been a great discussion. We will be contacting you about taking action. And I would like to finish and conclude with a song. And before Andy sings a song, I'll just share these words. I believe it's also from Heschel. He said, when we're in mourning, we go through 3 phases. First, stunned silence. Then we shed tears. And then we enter into song and sing the praise of our loved ones. We've had silence, we've had tears. Now it's time for a song to conclude this discussion.
Okay, so back to that text. I'm going to have to make it a little bit smaller. Hang on a second. Oh, my bad. Okay, the top of the page there, you see the world in which we live. Y'all see that? The world in which we live? Okay, here we go. The world in which we live can be a narrow bridge. The most important thing is not to fear. Keep moving straight ahead, and by your heart be led. Don't waste your day in dread, help is near. A narrow bridge, but every step across might lead you home. Gesher tsar me'od, gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefachid klal. So many things have changed, nothing near the same. Is it the way you thought it would be? I hang on every hope, I climb the burning rope, suspended free I float, look up and see. A narrow bridge, but every step across might lead you home. Gesher tsar me'od, gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefachid klal. The world in which we live can be a narrow bridge. The most important thing is not to fear.
Thank you, Andy. I did say we'd end with a song, but I'm going to contradict myself, which I sometimes do. I don't want anyone here to be discouraged. I want everyone to be encouraged. We Jews have the solution to this and all problems. Beat their swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. In a democracy, we have the ability to rise up and make change. Let us take advantage of that precious, precious right and responsibility. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this discussion. Take care.